There is a moment in life when the soul stops obeying and starts remembering. This phrase isn't in self-help books. It doesn't appear in family advice. No one warns you when it's coming. But at 60, it knocks on your door like an undeniable whisper, as if something inside you woke up from a decades-long sleep and said, "Enough is enough." You wake up one day and realize that the clothes you wear no longer make sense. The conversations that used to excite you now exhaust you. The achievements that should make you proud seem to belong to someone else. You look at your own life as if looking at an old photograph and think, "That's not me," or rather, "That was never really me." It's not depression. It's not a late midlife crisis. It's something deeper, older, more real. It's your soul finally saying, after years of obedient silence, "I waited for you to finish building this whole life. Now listen to me." Carl Jung called this the second half of life, the moment when everything that has been repressed, postponed, forgotten, or sacrificed begins to demand attention. Not with violence, with weariness, with a fatigue that is not in the body, but in the meaning of things. And no one prepares you for this. Because recognizing this turning point means admitting something terrible and liberating at the same time. You have spent decades living outwardly, responding to expectations, fulfilling roles, sustaining masks. And now, when everyone thinks you should be resting, enjoying the fruits of what you have built, celebrating a successful life, the soul demands exactly the opposite. It demands that you turn inward, that you finally stop pretending, that you face everything you left behind while you were chasing what others said was important. Because the truth is this: at 60, the soul doesn't change direction. It simply stops following someone else's map. And when that happens, everything that seems solid begins to shake. Certainties waver, roles weigh heavily, and you realize with a clarity that hurts and liberates at the same time that you've spent your whole life building someone who may never have really existed. And now, with less time than ever, your soul finally has the courage to ask, what if I lived what's left being who I really am? The first thing you feel is not pain, it is strangeness. As if you had memorized a script your whole life and suddenly the lines no longer come out naturally. You can still say the right words, make the expected gestures, smile at the appropriate moments, but something inside you refuses to participate. And that refusal is silent, almost imperceptible. No one around you notices, but you feel it. It's a different kind of fatigue. It's not your body that hurts, although it also complains. It's an existential exhaustion, as if you've been carrying a character on your back for decades and now it weighs too much to continue. Jung called this the weight of the persona, the social mask we build to be accepted, loved, respected. He said that the first half of life is about building this mask. The second half is about taking it off. But no one teaches you that taking it off hurts, that it's like tearing off a second skin. At 60, you begin to realize that you've spent your entire life trying to be the perfect mother, the exemplary professional, the understanding wife, the strong man who never breaks down. And it worked. You succeeded. People respect you, admire you, depend on you. But there's a problem. You no longer recognize yourself in the mirror, because that person everyone sees is not you. It's an edited, approved, safe version. And now, for the first time, you begin to feel the real cost of that editing. The things that once made you proud are starting to seem empty. That job you worked so hard to build, it seems like just that, effort. Not pleasure, not fulfillment, effort. The conversations that once excited you, now they seem shallow, automatic, predictable. You find yourself thinking, why am I here? What am I doing? And the answer that comes is disturbing. I don't know anymore. It is at this point that many try to ignore the symptom. They try to force another day like the others, another mechanical smile, another ready answer. But the soul, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. It begins to whisper more insistently. And the whisper says something you don't want to hear. You're living someone else's life, and time is running out. Because that's what turning 60 brutally teaches you. Time is not infinite. You always knew that, of course. But knowing and feeling are two different things. At 60, you feel it. You look back and see decades that have passed at a frightening speed. You look ahead and see less, much less. And this awareness doesn't paralyze you. It wakes you up. It forces you to ask, what do I still want to experience? What am I pretending? What have I saved for later that no longer has a later? Jung said that the midlife crisis is about realizing that you won't live forever. But the crisis of 60 is different. It's about realizing that you may never have truly lived. That you spent so much time building, proving, pleasing, sustaining that you forgot to ask, is this mine? Or is it what was expected of me? And when that question finally reaches you, it doesn't come alone. It brings something with it. Memories. Memories of who you were before you learned to be who others needed you to be. Memories of dreams you kept in a drawer and never opened again. Memories of versions of yourself that fell by the wayside, sacrificed in the name of responsibility, security, what was sensible. And these memories don't come back to make you suffer. They come back to remind you, I'm still here and there's still time. But time for what exactly? To start over? To change everything? Not necessarily. At 60, it's not about turning the tables. It's about something more subtle and perhaps more courageous. It's about stopping pretending, stopping upkeeping the edited version of yourself, stopping smiling when you don't want to, saying yes when you want to say no, carrying the weight of expectations that were never yours. And that's when fear sets in, because if you stop pretending, who will love you? If you drop the mask, who will stay? If you start living authentically from the inside out, what will be left of your relationships, your certainties, your identity? These questions are scary, but at 60, the soul no longer cares about fear. It cares about truth. And the truth is that you can't take another day of being someone you're not. So the first symptom is this: a deep fatigue, a tiredness of pretending, an exhaustion of sustaining the character. And when you finally admit this to yourself, not to others but to yourself, something disturbing happens. You realize that you are not alone in this feeling, that there is a part of you, buried for decades, that is asking to come back. And that part has a name. Jung called it the shadow, and it is knocking at the door. There is something strange that happens at 60. You start dreaming about people you haven't seen in decades. Places from your childhood come back with disturbing clarity. Old conversations echo in your head for no apparent reason. And you wake up with a feeling you can't name, as if something inside you is trying to remind you of something. Not an appointment, a version of yourself that was left behind. This is not nostalgia. It is not a romantic longing for the past. It is something much more urgent. It is the soul taking stock. It is searching through the archives of your life, looking for what has been forgotten, repressed, sacrificed. And what it finds is not pretty. It's not just sweet memories of simpler times. It's entire versions of yourself that were abandoned along the way. Dreams you kept in a drawer and locked away. Desires you stifled because they didn't fit into the life you had to build. Parts of you that were considered inappropriate, immature, inconvenient, and that for this reason were left to die in silence. Jung called this the shadow, and most people misunderstand it. They think the shadow is the dark side, the bad impulses, the hidden evil. But that's not it. The shadow isn't necessarily evil, it's incomplete. It's everything you had to put aside to become acceptable. Everything that didn't fit into the persona, the social mask you built to survive in the world. Think about it this way. When you were 20, maybe you wanted to be an artist, but you were told that art doesn't pay the bills. So you shelved that and became something else. When you were 30, maybe you wanted to travel alone, disappear for a while, find yourself. But you had responsibilities, so you stayed. When you were 40, maybe you wanted to scream, cry, admit you were tired, ask for help. But you had to be strong, so you swallowed it. And so decade after decade, you built a life. But to build that life, you had to dismantle pieces of yourself. And now at 60, those pieces are coming back. Not like vengeful ghosts, but like abandoned children knocking on your door. They don't want to punish you. They want to be seen, recognized, integrated. This explains why, at 60, many people suddenly feel like doing things out of character. The woman who spent her life taking care of everyone suddenly wants to travel alone. The man who has always been rational and controlled starts crying while watching movies. The person who has always been serious and responsible feels an inexplicable urge to start over, to study something new, to drop everything and try again. And everyone around them finds it strange. What's gotten into him? She's having a crisis. But it's not a crisis, it's a return. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires you to rescue the shadow, to bring back what has been excluded from your official history. Because as long as those pieces are on the outside, you will never be whole. You will always be a fragmented, edited, safe version, but not complete. And completeness at 60 is the only thing that matters. You no longer want to be admired. You want to be real. You no longer want to be loved for your role. You want to be seen for who you really are, with your contradictions, your flaws, the parts you've hidden your whole life. But looking at the shadow hurts, because it means looking at everything you haven't lived, for all the choices you made because you didn't have the courage to do otherwise, for all the pieces of yourself that were considered too much or not enough and were therefore left out. And there is mourning in that. Mourning for the parallel lives you didn't live, for the musician you could have been, for the adventurer you repressed, for the sensitive man you hid because men don't cry, for the strong woman you silenced because women can't be aggressive. This mourning is not optional. If you want to become whole, you need to recognize what has been lost, not to punish yourself, not to regret, but to integrate. to say, yes, that was also mine, and it still is. Because the truth is that these parts never died. They were just waiting for you to be brave enough to let them come back. And at 60, the soul finally has that courage, because it has nothing left to lose. The career is done, the children are raised, the image is built. And now for the first time you can afford to be honest, not with others, with yourself. But this honesty comes at a price, because when you start bringing the shadow back, when you start recognizing these abandoned parts, the life you've built begins to shake. The relationships that were based on your role begin to make less sense. The roles you played so perfectly begin to feel tight, suffocating, false. And you find yourself faced with a terrible choice. Continue pretending to keep the peace, or stop pretending and face chaos. Most people at this point back down. They look at the shadow, feel the weight of what has been lost, and decide that it is safer not to touch it. That it is better to leave things as they are. That it is too late to change. But the soul, once awakened, no longer accepts this answer. It doesn't want security. It wants truth. And the truth at 60 is that there is still time. There is still time to integrate. There is still time to live what has been postponed. There is still time to become whole. But for that, you will need to do something radical. Something that society does not teach. That your family does not encourage. That no one around you will understand. You will need to betray your persona. Dismantle the mask. Stop being what others need and start being who you really are. And that, more than anything else, is what defines the second half of life. It is not about achieving more. It's about letting go. It's not about building more masks. It's about having the courage to take off the ones that are already there. And when you finally do that, when you finally stop pretending, something inevitable happens. The people around you start to feel strange because they no longer recognize who you are becoming. And then the hardest part of all begins. The strange thing is that no one notices when it starts. There is no date marked on the calendar. There is no event that triggers it all. But suddenly, you're in the middle of a conversation and you realize you can no longer pretend to be interested. Someone is talking, you're listening, but there's a voice inside you saying, I don't care about this, and I don't want to pretend I care anymore. Before, you would have made the effort. You would have smiled, nodded, said the right things, because that's what was expected of you. Because maintaining harmony has always been your responsibility. Because displeasing someone always seemed worse than displeasing yourself. But now, at 60, something inside you refuses, not with aggression, with exhaustion, with a quiet honesty that says, I can't do this anymore. And that's scary, because your whole life you've been rewarded for pleasing others. You've been loved for being understanding. You've been valued for being helpful. You've been respected for never complaining, never disappointing, never saying no. Your identity was built on that, being the person everyone could count on. The one who solves problems, the one who calms things down, the one who holds everything together. And it worked. You became indispensable. But indispensable to whom? To others, never to yourself. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires betrayal, not to others necessarily, but to the persona, the social mask you built to be accepted. And that betrayal is violent, because it means admitting that you spent decades being someone who, deep down, was just functional. Someone who fit well into other people's scripts. Someone who didn't bother anyone, didn't demand anything, didn't question anything. At 60, you begin to see this with brutal clarity. You look at your relationships and realize how many of them are based on roles, not people. You are loved as a mother, as a wife, as a professional, as a trusted friend. But what about you, stripped of all these roles? Who loves you? Who really sees you? And the answer is often disturbing. Almost no one. Because you never let anyone see you. You were too busy being useful. And now, when you start to let go of these roles, when you start to say no without explanation, when you allow yourself to be selfish for the first time in your life, people find it strange. They look at you as if you've changed, as if you've become different, harder, more distant. And you want to shout, I haven't changed, I just stopped pretending. But you don't scream, because screaming would still be explaining yourself. And you're tired of explaining yourself. There's a specific loneliness in this process, a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who only know you through your mask. You're in the middle of your family, in the middle of your friends, in the middle of the life you've built, and you feel completely invisible because they're not seeing you. They see the version of you they always needed, and that version no longer exists. This explains why so many relationships go into crisis at this stage, not because the love is over, but because the love was sustained by roles. You loved your partner as the provider, the protector, the stable one. They loved you as the caregiver, the understanding one, the one who never gives up. And now, when you stop playing those roles, when you finally say, I'm tired too, when you admit, I'm scared too, the whole structure shakes. Because it wasn't a relationship between two whole people. It was a contract between two functions. And undoing those contracts hurts because it means disappointing. It means ceasing to be what others need in order to start being who you are. And the guilt comes on strong. The guilt of being selfish, of changing the rules in the middle of the game, of betraying the person you've always been. But Jung would say, you're not betraying anyone. You're recovering. You're bringing back the pieces of yourself that were left out so that you could fit into the lives of others. And there is immense courage in that. A courage that no one recognizes because from the outside it just looks like stubbornness, late rebellion, the selfishness of someone who has already lived their life and now just wants to think about themselves. But that's not it. It's the opposite. It's finally having the courage to think about yourself after a lifetime of thinking about everyone else. It's finally having the courage to exist, not just function. At 60, you realize that you've spent your whole life afraid of being rejected, afraid that if you stopped pleasing others, no one would stay. And now, at the worst and best possible moment, you're willing to test that. You're willing to find out who stays when you stop trying so hard, who loves you for who you are, not for what you do. And the answer can be painful. Some people will leave, some relationships will end, some bonds will prove to be more fragile than you imagined. But those who stay are different. They are the ones who see you. The ones who don't need you to be perfect, useful, always available. The ones who can love you even when you are tired, vulnerable, too honest. And those few are worth more than the crowd that loved you for the mask. Jung called this the price of individuation. You cannot become whole without losing the relationships that were based on your fragmentation. You cannot become real without pushing away the people who only wanted you to be functional. And yes, it hurts. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is to die being loved by someone you never were. It is to reach the end with a lifetime of applause for a character, while you, the real person, were never seen. So at 60, you make a choice that no one taught you to make, that no one will applaud, that will cost you dearly. You choose to stop pleasing, to stop wearing the mask, to stop being who others need you to be and start being who you really are. And when you make that choice, when you finally take off the mask and look in the mirror, something inevitable happens. You see yourself. For the first time in decades, you see yourself. And what you find is not pretty. It is not comfortable, but it is real. And it is from that naked truth, that brutal honesty, that everything can begin again. There is a moment after the mask falls when you are alone with yourself. And it is not a poetic moment. It is not that romantic loneliness from the movies, where the protagonist finds himself in a cabin in the mountains and has a beautiful epiphany. It is rawer than that. It's you, in the silence of your room, staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, and finally asking the questions you've avoided your whole life. What is still mine? What was imposed on me? What did I pretend to be for so long that I started to believe it was true? These questions are not rhetorical. They demand answers. And at 60, the soul no longer accepts half-truths. It no longer accepts I did the best I could, or I had no choice, or that's how things had to be. It wants to know, but what about you? Where were you while you were building all this? Where was your will, your desire, your truth? And then comes the confrontation. The real one, not with others, with yourself, because you realize that much of your life has been lived on autopilot. You made decisions not because you wanted to, but because it was expected. You got married because it was time to get married. You had children because it was the next step. You stayed in your job because it was safe. You maintained relationships because it was convenient. And in the midst of it all, you lost yourself. Not because of anyone else, simply because survival required you to adapt. And adaptation, taken to the extreme, is betrayal of yourself. Jung said that the shadow, everything we repress in order to be accepted, eventually asks to be seen. And at 60, it no longer asks. It demands. It forces you to look at everything you left behind. The dreams you considered foolish, the desires you judged selfish, the anger you swallowed, the sadness you disguised, the versions of yourself that were never allowed to exist. And looking at this is not liberating at first. It is devastating. Because you realize how much time you have lost. How many versions of yourself died without ever being lived? How many choices you made out of fear, guilt, with the feeling that you didn't deserve more than that? There is a huge difference between regret and sorrow. Regret paralyzes you. It's that I should have done it differently that traps you in the past and prevents you from moving on. But sorrow is something else. Sorrow is recognizing, yes, that hurt. Yes, I lost that. Yes, I wish it had been different. And then moving on. Not denying the pain, but integrating it. Transforming it into wisdom, not a burden. At 60, what the soul asks for is not regret. It is conscious regret. It is the courage to look at your own history with all its flaws and wounds and say, that's how it was, that's how it went, and there's no going back. But also to say, and there's still time, there's still life, you can still live differently. And this is where the greatest fear of all lies. Not the fear of being wrong, but the fear of being right. The fear of recognizing that yes, you lived for decades in a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a functional lie. A life that worked, that sustained, that kept everything going. But it wasn't yours. And if you admit that, what's left? If you recognize that much of what you've built doesn't represent you, what's left? Your identity crumbles. Your certainties turn to dust, and you're left there, naked, without the references that have always guided you. That's why so many people back down at this point. That's why so many people, when they get close to this truth, invent a distraction, find a new project, immerse themselves in something that occupies their mind. Because facing this naked truth requires something that few have. The courage not to know who you are. The courage to start from scratch at 60 without a map, without guarantees, without the security of a ready-made identity. But those who cross over, discover something rare. They discover that on the other side of the collapse there is space, there is lightness, there is the possibility of rebuilding, but this time from the inside out, not for others, for yourself. If you've come this far and felt something stir inside you, a pain, a recognition, a desire to finally stop pretending, I invite you to leave a sentence in the comments, not for others to see, for you to read, a promise from your soul to yourself, a sentence that marks this turning point. And if you know someone who is at this crossroads, who is feeling this call but thinks they are alone, share this video. Because there are people around you living this in silence, thinking they are going crazy, when in fact they are finally waking up. Jung said, there is no maturation without pain. And at 60, the pain is this, recognizing that you may have lived a whole life without really living. But the reward is proportional, because now for the first time, you have the chance to truly live. Not a perfect life, an honest life, not an admired life, your life. And when you make peace with that, when you finally accept that yes, there have been losses, but there are also possibilities, something extraordinary happens. The guilt begins to dissolve, the weight begins to lift from your shoulders, and for the first time in decades, you take a deep breath and realize, lightness is possible, beauty is possible, even in ruin, especially in ruin. There is a beauty that only appears after destruction. It is not the beauty of the new, the untouched, the perfect. It is the beauty of what has been broken and reassembled, of what has fallen and had the courage to rise again differently. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect. And at 60, for the first time, you understand the difference. Because perfection is about hiding the cracks. Wholeness is about showing them. Perfection is about fitting into the mold. Wholeness is about breaking the mold and existing as you really are, with all your contradictions, with all your flaws, with all the parts that don't quite fit. When you finally stop trying to be perfect, when you finally accept that you never were and never will be, something strange happens. You become lighter, not because the problems are gone, but because you stopped carrying the weight of the illusion. The illusion that if you tried hard enough, if you were good enough, if you pleased enough, you would finally be loved, accepted, complete. But the truth is, you never had to try to be complete. You always were. What was missing was not perfection. It was permission. Permission to exist as you are. Permission to fail without destroying yourself. Permission to be human. At 60, you finally give yourself that permission. Not because you've become wiser, but because you've become more tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of sustaining the edited version of yourself. Tired of living as if life were a test you need to pass. And in that tiredness, in that surrender, there is unexpected grace. You stop running. You stop proving. You stop trying to convince someone that you deserve to be here. You simply are. And you discover that being, simply being, is enough. It is more than enough. It is revolutionary. And that is when life begins again. Not in the sense of starting from scratch, but in the sense of living with truth as your compass, not fear. You make different choices. Choices that would have seemed crazy, selfish, irresponsible before. You end relationships that no longer make sense. You start projects you've always put off. You travel alone. You cry when you feel like it. You say no without explaining yourself. You say yes with your whole heart. And the people around you don't understand. They think you're having a crisis, that you're throwing everything away, that you're wasting the years that should be restful. But you know that's not it. You know you're doing exactly the opposite. You're finally living. You're finally inhabiting your own life, not just watching it from afar. There's a lightness to it that's hard to explain. It's not the lightness of someone who has no problems. It's the lightness of someone who has stopped pretending they don't. It's the lightness of someone who has accepted that life is imperfect, that people are imperfect, that you are imperfect, and that this is not a tragedy. It's the human condition. Jung said that the goal of the second half of life is not to accumulate more achievements. It is to integrate. It is to gather all the pieces that have been separated along the way and finally form a whole. The feminine and the masculine, strength and vulnerability, light and shadow, the person you were and the person you can still be. And when you do that, when you stop fighting yourself and start embracing yourself as a whole, something changes in your face. It is not youth. It is not conventional beauty. It's presence. It's authenticity. It's the mark of someone who has stopped lying. And that mark is rare, because most people spend their entire lives hiding behind filters, forced smiles, approved versions of themselves. But you, at 60, no longer need that. You can afford to be real. And there is immense freedom in that. A freedom you never imagined possible, because your whole life you were told that freedom was having money, having time, having choices. But no one told you that true freedom is no longer needing the approval of others to exist. And when you achieve that freedom, when you finally free yourself from the prison of pleasing, of performing, of maintaining the mask, you discover that life becomes more intense. Not more hectic, more intense. Every conversation matters more. Every gesture carries more weight. Every choice is more conscious, because you are no longer living on autopilot. You are truly living, and people sense that in you. They may not understand. They may even distance themselves. But some will come closer, attracted precisely by what you spend your whole life hiding, your truth, your humanity, your imperfect wholeness. And these people, the few who can truly see you, are the ones who stay. They are the ones who matter. They are the ones who make the years that remain not only livable but valuable. There is a moment after the whole structure collapses and rebuilds itself, when something changes in the way you relate to the world. It is not a visible change. No one around you can point out exactly what is different, but you feel it. It is as if the language you have always used to communicate with life has been translated into a new, truer, more direct language. You stop explaining your decisions, not because you have become arrogant or indifferent, but because you understand that those who need an explanation will not understand anyway, and those who understand do not need an explanation. This understanding changes everything. You stop wasting energy justifying why you said no, why you changed your mind, why you chose differently. You simply choose, and you inhabit that choice with total presence. Time also takes on a different meaning. At 60, you no longer measure your days by what you have accomplished, by the number of tasks completed, by the goals achieved. You measure them by the depth of what you have experienced, by that conversation that really mattered, by that shared silence that said more than 1,000 words, by the sunset you stopped to watch, not because you had time to spare, but because you finally understood that watching the sunset is as important as anything else you could be doing. Jung spoke about the difference between living in chronological time and living in inner time. Chronological time is the clock, the calendar, the agenda. It is the tyranny of I have to do this now, and I can't miss that. But inner time is something else. It is the time of the soul, the time when a minute can seem like an eternity and a year can pass in a flash. And at 60, you finally learn to live in inner time. You stop chasing the hands of the clock and start inhabiting the moments. And that transforms even love. Love at 60 ceases to be that desperate need to complete something that is missing in you. It ceases to be fantasy, projection, expectation that the other will save you, heal you, make you whole. Love becomes presence. You no longer love to fill a void. You love because you choose to be close. Because that person with all their imperfections and limitations resonates with who you really are. And you don't need to change them. You don't need to mold them. You simply accompany them and let them accompany you. And there is a tenderness in that you have never experienced before. Because for the first time in your life, you are not loving from a place of lack. You are loving from a place of wholeness. And love that comes from wholeness does not demand. It does not control. It does not require. It simply offers. It offers space. It offers silence. It offers presence without invasion. And that, more than any grand gesture, is what sustains a real relationship. Fear also changes. It does not disappear. You do not become an enlightened being who is afraid of nothing. But fear ceases to be the commander of your decisions. You have fallen so many times, made so many mistakes, been through so much, that fear loses the paralyzing power it once had. You look at it and think, yes, I'm afraid, and I'm going to do it anyway. Not because you have become brave, but because you understand that waiting for fear to go away before acting is waiting your whole life. And here is the last illusion that needs to fall. The illusion that one day you will be ready, that one day you will have all the answers, all the clarity, all the security you need to finally live for real. At 60, you understand that that day never comes. You will never be totally ready. You will never be absolutely sure. And that's okay, because life is not about being sure. It's about having the courage to live without it. This is the wisdom that no one teaches you. It doesn't come from books. It doesn't come from courses. It doesn't come from well-intentioned advice. It comes from scars. It comes from nights when you thought you couldn't take it anymore, but you did. It comes from losses that you thought would destroy you, but didn't. It comes from all the times you got up when it would have been easier to stay down. And this wisdom doesn't need to be said. It's in your eyes, in the way you move, in the calm you carry even in the midst of chaos. People sense this in you. And there are two types of reactions. Some walk away because your presence confronts them, because you stop playing the game of appearances, empty conversations, staged lives. And that bothers those who are still trapped in that theater. But others come closer, attracted precisely by what you hid your whole life, your naked truth. And those few, those rare ones, are the ones who transform the years that remain not just into time that passes, but into life that really happens. You realize that you no longer need an audience. You no longer need external validation to know that you are on the right path. You have an internal compass now, and it points in a very simple direction, toward what is real, toward what is true, towards what resonates with who you really are, without masks, without filters, without the edited version of yourself that you have sustained for so long. And when you finally live from that internal compass, when you finally trust yourself more than you trust the opinions of others, something extraordinary happens. You stop betraying yourself. You stop making concessions that betray your essence. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop staying where you don't want to be. You stop sustaining relationships that drain you more than they nourish you. And in that refusal, in that holy refusal to continue betraying yourself, you finally find yourself. Not an improved version of yourself, not a corrected version, but you, simply you. And you discover that this has always been enough. There is a place you always wanted to return to but never knew how to name. It is not a physical place. It is not your childhood home. It is not a city. It is not a country. It is a state of being where you don't have to prove anything, sustain anything, pretend anything. A state where you simply exist, without armor, without performance, without fear of being rejected for who you are. Jung called this a return to the self, reconnecting with the essential core that has always been there, but has been buried by layers and layers of social adaptation, conditioning, survival. And at 60, after decades of wandering in foreign territory, you finally find your way back. Not because someone gave you a map, but because you stopped following other people's maps. This return is not an achievement. It is a surrender. You stop fighting against who you are. You stop trying to fit into molds that were never made for you. You stop punishing yourself for the parts of yourself that don't fit into the narrative of a successful person or an exemplary life. You look at your story, with all the mistakes, with all the falls, with all the imperfect choices, and finally say, that's it. That's how it happened. And it's okay. This reconciliation with your own story is the hardest work there is, because it means forgiving yourself. Not superficially, not with ready-made self-help phrases, but for real. Forgiving the young person you were who made bad decisions because you didn't know any better. Forgiving the adult you were who hurt people because you were hurt. Forgiving the version of yourself who pretended to be fine when you were falling apart inside. Forgiving all the times you betrayed yourself, abandoned yourself, silenced yourself. And when you manage to do that, when you manage to look at yourself with the same compassion you would offer a dear friend, something opens up, a lightness you didn't know was possible, because you carried the guilt for so long that it became part of your identity. You got used to the weight, and now without it, you hardly recognize yourself. But that lightness doesn't mean the pain is gone. It means you've learned to carry the pain without letting it define you. You've learned that it's possible to have scars and still be whole, that it's possible to have lost a lot and still have enough, that it's possible to look back and feel longing, regret, even sadness, and still look forward with hope. Jung said, the second half of life is not about conquest, it's about integration. And at 60, you finally understand what that means. It's not about adding more things to your life. It's about putting together the pieces that have always been there, but that you kept separate. Strength and vulnerability, light and shadow, the person you showed to the world and the person you kept just for yourself. All these parts, all these versions, all these layers, they finally come together. And from this encounter, something rare is born, the peace of being who you are. And this peace is not passive. It is not resignation. It is not giving up or accepting fate. It is the opposite. It is a silent strength, a strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. a strength that doesn't need to prove anything because it has already been through everything. It is the strength of someone who knows they have died and been reborn so many times that death is no longer the end, but just another transformation. At 60, you carry this strength in your eyes, in the way you listen without judging, in the way you speak without manipulating, in the way you love without suffocating, in the way you walk away without drama, in the way you stay without getting attached. You become a clean mirror, and those who look at you see not an unattainable ideal but a real possibility. The possibility of living truthfully, even in a world that rewards lies. And when you arrive at this place, this state of being where you are finally at home within yourself, you realize that the whole journey made sense. The pain, the losses, the detours, the mistakes, everything had a purpose. Everything brought you here. And here finally you can rest. Not because life is over, but because the internal war is over. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer trying to be someone else. You simply are. And being, simply being, is the quietest and most powerful revolution there is. At 60, the soul does not change direction. It simply stops following someone else's map and finally takes you where you should always have been, inside yourself. And when you get there, when you finally come home after decades lost in foreign territory, you discover that you never had to prove anything. You never had to be perfect. You never had to please everyone. You just had to have the courage to be real. And that courage doesn't come easily. It comes after a lot of falling, a lot of making mistakes, a lot of pretending, and a lot of getting lost. But it comes, and when it comes, it transforms everything. Because you finally understand that aging is not about decline, it's about refinement. It's not about losing, it's about letting go of what was never yours. It's not about ending, it's about starting for the first time to truly live. If you've made it this far and something inside you recognizes this journey, leave a comment. What is the one truth about yourself that you've spent your whole life hiding, and that now finally is ready to be seen? It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be real. And if you know someone who is going through this transformation in silence, thinking they are alone, share this video. Because there are people around you who need to hear that what they are feeling is not crazy. It is awakening. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the video description. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.